Jesus is he's not antithetical against such justice. He loves that. He loves that justice. He knows in our hearts, we got to fight for the widows and the orphans. We got to fight for he's not saying just sit around and because here's what we do. Here's what would be easier. Let's sit around the pub. Let's sit around the coffee shop and go, we never should have gone against Hitler because Jesus says don't resist evil. We never should have, go to listen, this is not what Jesus is Jesus is not talking about how to run a country. It's fascinating that we try to look and go, Jesus instructs non-Christian systems to act Christianly, and we expect people to actually function in a Christian way who don't even know. It's hard enough if you're following Jesus to follow Jesus, let alone to expect people who don't know Jesus to all of a sudden act with the Jesus. He's not talking about how to run a country. He's talking about how to run your life. It's way easier to sit around and project about, well, I think this system and that politically, and we shouldn't have police and we shouldn't have army. He's going, hey, instead of reforming all of society, how about you start with you? Figure your own life out, because here's your problem. When your family member says something bad against you, you lash out, you defend yourself. You start calling your cousin and your mom and your father and go, so she said this, he said this, I can't believe it. Don't you know the real truth? Don't you know? See, this is what he's after. He's not telling you to run a country. He's telling you to run your own life. And here's the practical examples he gives. Someone hits you on the one cheek, turn to him the other. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. First question is, how could we ever get to a place in our life where we live this ethic out? If someone hurts you, wrongs you, how can you get to a place in your life where you don't return evil with evil, but you return evil with good? How can you possibly get to that place? The first major thing is this. You got to know this. Jesus doesn't say it here, but the rest of the New Testament teaches this, that the only way you can get there in your life is if you really believe that God will have vengeance in the end. See, it is very odd for a group of people to come out and say there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no God who's going to punish people. The only comfort we have, and you go to tribes in Africa, you go to places in Croatia, you go to places like Syria right now, you know what hope that they hold on to as men go through these tribes and rape their women and kill their children? You know what hope they're not, here's the options. If you're going to tell them not to resist, you've got to give them something. The options are, if there's no God, then you just don't resist and the evil wins. But if there is a God, here's the foundation upon which you don't respond. You don't respond because God will mete out his vengeance in the end. That's the point. This is what Paul talks about in Romans 12. He says this. He says, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. If you don't have that option, then you will carry out all kinds of injustices in this life. One of the heroes of my life is the senior pastor of South Delta, the church that we planted out of. His name's Paul Johnson. Well, the reason he's one of the heroes of my life is because I've seen him live this out, man, in a way that none of us would ever dream upon our worst enemy. His own son was murdered a few years ago. And Paul's response to that, because he is so sure that God's justice is going to be dealt with in the end, is he's able to go into the prison and visit with the young man who killed his own son and hug him and say, I want you to meet Jesus. It's mind-boggling. How can you get to that place? Because he knows if there's not a God who's going to carry out vengeance and justice purely and rightly, then I've got to carry it out now in this life. But if there is some moment where all evil will be dealt with and all good will be rewarded, then I don't need to bring this stuff into my life now. I can let God start to figure this stuff out. And so those moments where we don't retaliate, we're showing the world it's because I have a treasure greater than retaliation. That God is so all satisfying to me